Hello everyone and welcome to week 3. In this video we'll be discussing institutional diversity in American higher education. To start off a discussion about institutional diversity in the United States, I want to provide a visual of the distribution of institutions across the 50 states. Take a look at a favorite state. Does that number surprise you? Let's take Louisiana. Are there really 88 institutions of higher education in this state? Based on the detailed listing from the Carnegie Foundation, this number includes institutions from every segment, including public, private, and for-profit. We're going to address each of those segments in a few minutes. Discussions about higher education in the United States often gets broken down into what we see as two distinct categories, 2-year and 4-year institutions. Generally, discussions of higher education in the United States are focused on 4-year institutions, but as you can see, 2-year institutions constitute over 1/3 of post-secondary schools in the U.S. Think about the literature that you've come across so far in the program, and you'll likely notice that most of it is based on 4-year institutions. And we're going to touch on another aspect that we see in literature in just a moment when we look at institutional size. So it really isn't fair to limit our discussions of higher ed as a 2-year versus 4-year dichotomy, because really our institutions are much more diverse than that. As you can see in this graphic, associates colleges, which we often refer to as tier institutions, represent roughly 41%, as the previous slide indicated, a little over 2/3, or a little over 1/3 rather. But if we break it down further, we can see that there's a lot of diversity in the 4-year segment. And something that makes this discussion even messier is that there's overlap between these categories. So for example, we can see this category of special focus institutions. Well, some of those special focus institutions are baccalaureate colleges, some do offer master's degrees, and some of those are associate's granting colleges. Same thing with tribal colleges. Of those 32, most of them offer the associate's degree as the highest degree. Some of them offer baccalaureate, and I believe there's one that offers master's degrees. I think it's the MBA. And so it's really tough to break down our institutions and the diversity of institutions into a simple graphic because there's really a lot of overlap in terms of the types of institutions. Another segment about institutional diversity falls in lines with racial diversity. As you can see, the United States Department of Education has a series of institutional classifications that are based on the racial identity of the students who attend, or the historic mission to serve racially diverse individuals. Most of these categories have come about either as a result of the Higher Education Act of 1965 or through the various reauthorizations of that act since 1965. There's a link to this slide, or to the website from which the slide is drawn, in the final slide in the PowerPoint, which I'm posting along with the video, so that you have all these slides for reference, and that you can go visit the links for more information. There's another category that I don't really have a graphic to demonstrate because it was tough to really get some good accurate data on in a quick time frame. But we also continue to have some single-sex serving institutions in this country. Right now, based on the latest data that I found, which was from 2013, there are 66 men's colleges and 47 women's colleges. And some of those, we're going to see those numbers dwindling in the coming years because some of those institutions are currently in the process of becoming coeducational. And in fact, those numbers have been shrinking year by year over the past probably 20 to 25 years. Something else to keep in mind when we think about institutional diversity. So from the last slide, I want to dig deeper into a couple of different categories. The first being historically black colleges and universities. Right now, there are HBCUs found in 27 states. That's more than half the country, obviously. We have 50 states. Most of these institutions were established in the late 19th or early 20th century, which with the earliest coming actually in the 1830s. We saw a couple of private HBCUs being founded in Pennsylvania and Ohio, but most of those came about with the passage of the Morrill Act of 1890. Some were already existing, and then with the help from the Morrill Act, which was the second land grant act, um, we're able to get significant funding help to help them keep their doors open. And actually, some of those institutions uh, that were the benefactors from that second Morrill Act began life as private institutions, then transitioned to publics thanks to the help of that second Morrill Act. I'm going to, again, there's a link to the slide or to the website where this slide is drawn from, so you can dig deeper into the dispersion of HBCUs in this country. The other major racial category of institutions I want to touch on in this presentation are Hispanic serving institutions. And here's the HSI designation from the U.S. Department of Education. And you can see highlighted in red that the key determining factor is that the undergraduate full-time equivalent, or FTE, is at least 25% Hispanic. And so if we look at a map that shows the dispersion of HSIs across the country, you can see that this is from the 2011-2012 academic year, and all this data that this website used. Again, this link is posted in the PowerPoint for your perusal. It's all drawn from IPEDS, the Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System. All institutions report to IPEDS, and so that's where so many sources pull their data, including the Carnegie Foundation. They're pulling their data from IPEDS, as it's all based on institutional reporting. And then so you can get a sense of the dispersion and distribution of HSIs across the country. Um, and the green number represents the percentage of Hispanic people who are undergraduate students in that state or who reside in that state. The red number is the number of currently recognized HSIs, and the blue number is the numbers of emerging HSIs. You can see that that represents a current Hispanic FTE of 15 to 24.9%. And so projections are that those institutions will become officially designated very shortly here within the next year or two. So you can see in Louisiana, we have 3.4% of our undergraduates who are Hispanic and one emerging HSI. So let's switch gears and talk about institutional size. So as I mentioned, a lot of the literature that we have in our field is based on four-year institutions, and at that, a lot of it is based on large four-year institutions. And so if you're reading research about our field and about the students that we serve, you may get the sense that the field is, or the entire landscape of higher ed in this country in terms of institutions is really dominated by large four-year institutions. Well, that really isn't the case. As you can see, large institutions, which we would generally consider to be institutions that enroll 25,000 or more, represent only 18%, or 28%, I'm sorry, of the undergraduate enrollment in this country. And that most of our students, 72%, attend institutions that enroll 25,000 students or fewer. So they're small or medium-sized institutions. Now, there is a lot of great literature and a lot of great research studies that have been conducted at those smaller to mid-sized institutions, but I think a lot of what gets published that we see is based at those larger institutions. And part of that is because a lot of the research faculty are based at large institutions, and so they're conducting a lot of their research where they're at. Makes sense. We already have access for those of us who are at those larger institutions. Let's spend a moment thinking about institutional control. Now, there's a lot of talk going on lately about private for-profit institutions such as University of Phoenix and their colleagues. And there may be a perspective that they're starting to dominate and take over higher education. But as you can see, they're a part of the pie, but they're not an overwhelming part. They're much less than one third, with public and private nonprofit having a fairly even split, with taking up almost 75% of the total number of institutions in the U.S. So again, if we think about where are our students enrolled, we saw 2 slides ago that the largest number of our institutions are not large institutions. And here, when we think about institutional control, we can see that the numbers are actually skewed pretty significantly towards public institutions when it comes to enrollment. So if there's a pretty even split between the number of private and the number of public, um, one might assume that there's a pretty even split when it comes to enrollments. But as you can see, an overwhelming majority, again, almost 75% of the students are enrolled in public institutions. So roughly 15 million out of close to 21 million are enrolled in public institutions. This is just to give you a kind of a sense of the data that I pull from, and that has been drawn from IPEDS and the Carnegie website, for a perspective on our institutional diversity. This is just one screenshot of one of the many tables that are available on the Carnegie website. I encourage you to spend some time as you have it, digging around in the references, which are shown on this page. I've tried to match up the slide numbers to the appropriate reference. And on some of the slides, when you open the PowerPoint, you're going to see I have some notes that I've included for many of the slides, and you're going to see some additional websites listed for those slides. So I hope that this helps you get a little bit more depth and appreciation for institutional diversity in the United States, and look forward to sharing more with you in a future video on another topic.